We are standing here in the grounds of St. Joseph's Church, Aughavas, on the 30th of May 2000. We, the pupils of Aughavas National School, have selected St. Joseph's Church, Aughavas, as our favourite building for the Irish Independent Building for the Future project. We have invited local historian Michael Whelan along to tell us the history of this building, which plays a focal role in the parish of Aughavas.
Michael, first of all, can you tell us something of the old church that stood on this site before the present church?
Now, children, we're standing now here in what is known as Aughavas Old Graveyard. And if you look over there, you will see the site of the old church, which was called St. Mary's in Aughavas. It was built in 1837 and probably replaced an older church that was on that site, and probably that is why that the parish is called Aughavas, because this site here is in the townland of Aughavas, and a parish that had a church in a particular townland gave the name of that townland to the parish. Now, if you look there across, if you look just across there, you will see the track of the old church, which was called St. Mary's. Now, apparently, from what we are told, it was a longish church. The altar was on the western side, and the choir was here on the eastern side. I am told too that the sacristy was built out from the church, and that there were about 3 doors on the church. Now, that church was built in 1837 by a Reverend John Evers, who left Aughavas in 1839 and went as parish priest to Mohill. And indeed in Mohill he built a number of churches and schools as well. Now, that's all I have to say about that. It was called St. Mary's, and it was in what is now known as the old graveyard of Aughavas. In those days there was not a graveyard here, but in later times, when more place became available, a graveyard started here. Before that, the people here buried in Clune. Clune was the centre of 3 parishes: Clune, Aughavas and Gortletra. And in Clune there was the site of an old monastery, St. Freoch. And the people had a great veneration for that monastery, and it was there people in Aughavas buried until about the turn of the century, about 1890 to 1900. Now, that's...
The present church that we see before us is dedicated in 1929. What can you tell us about the work that had to be undertaken during the construction and its history up to the present day?
Now, children, the present church, as you know, is St. Joseph's Church, Aughavas. It was dedicated in 1929 by the Bishop of the Diocese that time, Dr. McNamee. Now, it was built after the old church was abandoned in 1837. 1837 was the year that that old church was built. But by the 1920s, that old church was going into ruin, and they decided that a new church would be built. The parish priest of the time was Father McGivney. And in the early years of the 1920s, Father McGivney decided that he would build a new church. So he got a committee together and they began raising money. The building itself began in 1925, and it took 4 years to build it. Now, as you look at it, And if you all look up there, you will see the lovely natural stone. Now that stone was cut from hunks of rock that were got on the site of the old church. All around here was very rocky. And as anybody knows, even down the road, you will find that kind of sandstone rock. Now, the men who cut the stone were what was known as journeymen masons, or journeymen stone masons. Each hunk of rock that was raised was supposed to yield about 5 or 6 stones. And there was each workman had a little shed, or a bunker as they called it, there at the back. If you just look towards the back from the priest's house, the presbytery, down to the road, there was about 20 of those little sheds or bunkers where those journeymen worked. Now, a stone took about a day, and you had to be very careful. But then there were very skilled tradesmen. If anything happened in the middle of the day that you hit a faulty stroke, well, the stone just went in too, and you had to begin again at a new stone. I don't know how often that happened. Now, the building began, and a lot of work was done voluntarily. In other words, people and men from the locality and the parish came and they worked. The man in charge, the contractor who had charge of it, was a Mr. Fleming from County Down, and the architect was a Mr. McNamara, I imagine from Dublin. Now, the sand from it was got locally, as of course the stone was. The sand was got from a sand pit in a neighbouring townland here, Drumgunny, from a sand pit owned by William Robert Woods, and the amount of money paid was £30 for a consignment that would do the church. Now that was a very loose agreement, and when it was found that it was taking an awful lot of sand to do it, the owner of the sandpit objected, and he was given another £20. Now, the sand was drawn by local carters. Every carter was expected to bring 9 loads per day. Now, at that time, it was horses and carts, and the sand was shoveled into it. The whole contract itself came to about £11,000. And of course that money had to be raised. There were no government grants, and it was raised by means of raffles and bazaars and the usual way that you raise money for parochial buildings. Generally, local dances were held in the local school, not the one up here now in Curduff, but the one that is now the community centre at Clonsarn. And that was a very suitable school because the partition was one that could be moved over to the side. It was a movable partition. Now those journeymen and those people who came after the work, they lodged locally. Many of them lodged in a local house just down from here. He was known as John Joe Maguire. And many of them lodged there. And they were paid weekly. Now the pay was regarded as quite high at the time, 10 shillings per day, which was pretty high. That would be for the skilled tradesmen. And the others who worked there were supposed to be paid at council rate. Now, when it came to the roofing, the contract said it was red deal, but the contractor thought he'd get away with white deal. And he had it up, and the architect was called in, and he said that it must be red deal. So the white deal had to be taken down, and in the taking down a lot of damage to the timber was done, and it is said that the contractor really lost on the contract, because in taking down the white deal a lot of damage was done, and it was of no use afterwards. And he had then he had the extra trouble of putting up the red deal again. Now, in the furnishings then of the church, the altar came from Portadown. It came by rail to Killishandra, and then it was brought out by horses and carts from the railway in Killishandra. In those times there was a railway in Killishandra, and it was brought by cart out, and it was erected in this church. It's a very nice altar, as you can see, and I just cannot say how much was paid for it. Now, the seating that you see now inside in that church is not the seating that originally was there. Those seats were put in the 1930s by Father O'Reilly. Now, the stone that you see here now, children, has a cross on it. Now, that stone tells us that inside there are relics of the saints. Generally, a church, when it's being dedicated, has relics of the saints. And the place here, that little space, was left when the masons were building the church for that particular stone. Now, that stone is a special stone. And it took 3 days. It took 3 days to do that stone, because it had to be countersunk so that there would be place left for the relics. Those relics were put in on the day of the dedication, and the stone then was placed in its place. That is therefore known as the stone, and as you can see, the cross is there. It's the stone with the relics, and that is where it is in this church. Now, another thing you could look at there is the lovely building that was done there. Now, what we are told is that a very good tradesman came and asked for work, and the man in charge wasn't sure how good he was. So in order, as we were to test him out, he put him to the back, to a place that wouldn't be seen. And it was found that he was an excellent stonemason. And you can see his work there in the back. Now, as you can see, children, the lovely altar that we have here came from Portadown in County Armagh. It was brought by rail to Killishandra station. In those days, railways were more important than roads. And it was brought from Killishandra then in parts to here. Now, the altar, as you can see, is the altar at the back, not this little one that was set up afterwards in later years after Vatican II, but the fine altar at the back. That's the altar we're speaking about. Now, the seating, as you can see here, the seating was not part of the original church. It was, those seats were made in the 1930s, and they were made by a local furniture maker in Carrigallen. We are told that the cost is £6, 10 shillings each. Now, I don't know what that would be in today's money, but it looks small to us. Now, some seating was brought from the old church, but not enough by any means to do here. Now, you must remember too, children, that in olden times, in the old church, there was no seating at all. And people who came to Mass just stood up. In fact, the original church, which I didn't mention, had a clay floor. And sometime around 1900 to 1910, a wooden floor was put in. So you can see that, you know, what we take for granted now did not exist in those days. The seating that was brought over to this church in 1929 just did about half the church, so that those who came to Mass after that had to stand up. But in the 1930s, when Father O'Reilly became parish priest a new set of seats were purchased, and these are the lovely seats that we have today. That gallery is held up now. Children, if you look back, you can see the gallery in this church. That gallery is held up by one huge beam across. Now that beam came from County Down, and it came again by rail to Killishandra, and it was brought on 2 carts. The beam went from one cart to the other. One cart was tied, as it were, to the end of the other one, and the beam was strung across the 2 carts. And a horse, we are told, a local horse belonging to Willie Curran of Aughavas Townland, was this horse because he was regarded as the best horse in the parish. And that's the huge beam that you see holding up the gallery, where the choir used to sing but no longer sing. Now children, that bell which you see, it's a very fine bell, and which is now being worked electronically, was donated to the parish by a Father Patrick Kiernan. His people came from a townland near here called Derndryhead, and he was a priest in America, in Minnesota. It's a fine bell, and was, as is written on it, came from Dublin, from Mr. Byrne. The other bell that was here before that naturally was traded in at the particular time, and it was brought by the Byrne firm back to Dublin. It has lasted very well up to now, and is now worked electronically. Up to that, John Joe Carroll and local people rang the bell for Mass and for funerals and other occasions such as that.
On the behalf of the pupils of Aughavas National School, I would like to sincerely thank Michael for the wonderful store of information he has given us on our parish church.